Hi everyone. So we are going to start solving equations today. We are going to apply the rules that we've been talking about with rewriting so that we can solve equations. We're going to do a little bit of review of what we did for Math 2 and then extend that into some of the things that we've been talking about the last couple of days. Alright, so there's three things that you guys are going to do today. You're going to fill out the notes with me. When you're done, you're going to show the sub that the notes are done so that the sub can give you the mini quiz. And then you are going to start the homework. Okay? Alright, don't feel like you need to rush through these notes. The quiz should be pretty quick. Alright. Okay, so I'll do the warm-up with you guys just as a review and some refresher since this is kind of what some of the material that the quiz will be on. Alright, so if you notice, we have these two things that we are multiplying, these roots, and we're raising it to the 15th power. We cannot multiply the x and the x squared because this is a cube root and this is a fifth root. Since they're not the same, we cannot do x times x squared. But what we can do is we can rewrite each of these. So this, that's a 1 right there, is the same as x to the 1/3 power times x to the 2/5 power. And then this whole thing is raised to the 15th power. And then this 15th gets multiplied in here. Okay, so that becomes x to the 15/3 times x to the 30/5. You can see that I can divide these. This becomes x to the 5th times x to the 6th. Notice same base, since I'm multiplying, I can add my exponents, so I get x to the 11th power. Alright, so that had some rewriting in it. It had raising a power to a power, and then at the end it had adding your exponents. So it had everything except for subtracting exponents. Okay, and the next one we need to rationalize since our radical's in the denominator. Alright, you want to consider what you want to take the cube root of. So this is where you'd be saying, okay, well, what's a good number to take the cube root of? 8's a good number to take the cube root. That's 2 times 2 times 2. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. And if I look at 3, I know that in order to rationalize this, it's going to be multiplied by the cube root of something over the cube root of something. Well, 3 times not a whole number is 8. So then I'm going to ignore this one. And then say, well, can I make 3 become 27? Yes, if I multiply it by 9. Cube root of 27 is 3. Okay, so I'm left with negative 9 cube root of 9 over this denominator. 3 times 9 gives me 27, and the cube root of 27 is 3. And then I can simplify. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3 cube root of 9. Okay. Alright, next one. This might be a good one to maybe try on your own. Pause it and see if you can do it, and then check your answer. Fourth root. So, fourth root. So just, I'll write it a little bit out for you. So, fourth root, I'd be thinking 2 to the 4th power, which is 16. 3 to the 4th power, which is 81. Okay. And if I look at the fourth root, I can make the fourth root. 9 times nothing is 16, but 9 times 9 is 81. So I actually want to multiply by the fourth root of 9. Or sorry, not the fourth root of 9. I want to multiply by something to make it the fourth root of 81. Okay, this is what I want it to become because the fourth root of 81 is 3. So this has to be multiplied by the fourth root of something over something. So 9 times 9 is 81, and then that'll give me a 3. So in the top, I get 6 times the fourth root of 9 over 9 times 9 gives me the fourth root of 81, and the fourth root of 81 is 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2 times the fourth root of 9. And there's your answer. Okay? Alright, so now let's do a little bit of review from last year before we start new stuff. Alright, so if you have x squared, remember solving means that you are undoing what is happening. So if this is x squared, then I would square root both sides, which means my answer is x equals. Remember, when you take the square root, your answer is plus or minus 9. The reason that it is plus or minus is because you are raised to an even power. So the fact that you are squared, because positive 9 squared and negative 9 squared both give you 81. So you have to pay attention to what the exponent is. Okay? Notice in this one we have a quantity that's being squared, so we square root both sides. We get x plus 3. Again, we have to say plus or minus anytime we take the square root, equals plus or minus 1. If we subtract 3 from both sides, we will get negative 3 plus or minus 1. And then we're going to want to simplify that. So negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2, and negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. So those would be my two answers. Alright, let's try again. A little bit more steps. Alright, so in this one I want to move the constant first. So if I subtract 10 to both sides, I get negative 36 equals negative x plus 2 squared. Before I can take the square root, I need to get rid of this coefficient, so I have to divide both sides by a negative, giving us 36 equals x plus 2 squared. Since the whole quantity is being squared, I want to square root. Because I square rooted, it's plus or minus 6 equals x plus 2. Okay, and I'm going to write this out just like we did in the last one. If we subtract 2, then it would be negative 2 plus or minus 6, which means negative 2 plus 6 gives me 4, and negative 2 minus 6 gives me negative 8. Okay, so that was a review from last year with quadratics and solving by taking square roots. Now we're going to apply that into something that's not a square root, so like a cube root, a fourth root. Alright, we are going to solve this over the real numbers. We're not going to deal with imaginaries in this unit. Okay, so over the real numbers. So if you get to something where you'd be taking like the square root of a negative, it's an imaginary, then there'd be no solution. Okay? Alright, so same idea. Notice I have a quantity that's now being cubed instead of squared, but same idea. I move the constant first, so if I subtract 1, I would get negative 1/3 x plus 7 cubed equals 9. I need to, again, get rid of the coefficient first, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is negative 3. Multiply by negative 3. Okay, those cancel, leaving me with x plus 7 cubed equals negative 27. In order to undo a square, I square root. In order to undo a cube, I cube root. So cube root. Okay, notice that's very similar to what we did up here. Squared, square root. So down here, cubed, I cube root. Okay, and whenever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I'm left with x plus 7 equals. The cube root of negative 27 means what times itself 3 times gives you negative 27. So the answer would be negative 3. Notice my answer is not plus or minus, because if I cube a negative number, I get a negative, whereas if I cube a positive, I get a positive. So there's only one way that I can get negative 27. It would be negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. Okay? Only even exponents is what we have to worry about. So then if I subtract 7, negative 3 minus 7 is negative 10. One solution. Okay? Okay, now if you take a look at number 8, notice the difference in the exponent. This is 3, it was odd, so it gives us one answer. This is 4, it is even, so it's going to give us two answers. So I'm going to write down that plus or minus so I know that when I do undo that, it's going to give me two solutions. Okay? Alright, so again, move the constant. If I add 9 to both sides, I get left with 2 times x minus 3 to the 4th equals 32. Again, get rid of your coefficient first, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Giving me 16. In order to undo a squared, I square rooted. In order to undo a cubed, I cube rooted. So in order to undo a fourth, I fourth root. Which leaves us with x minus 3 equals. The fourth root of 16 means what times itself? 4 times the 16. That would be plus or minus 2. Again, the plus or minus. Because 2 to the fourth and negative 2 to the fourth both give us 16. If I add 3 to both sides, I get 3 plus or minus 2, which you cannot leave your answer like that, but sometimes writing it out helps us see our two answers. So 3 plus 2 is 5, and 3 minus 2 is 1. Okay. Just so you understand why it's two answers, notice if I go back and substitute in, if I substitute a 5 in, 5 minus 3 is 2, 2 to the fourth is 16. If I substitute a 1 in, 1 minus 3 is negative 2, and negative 2 to the fourth is still positive 16. Okay? Alright, go ahead and flip over. I think there's another one. Oh, that's it. Okay, so go ahead and flip over. Okay, so same idea, except notice that I have a raised to a 2/3 power, so I'm going to add 8 to both sides. I'm going to divide by 6, and I'm going to undo that 2/3. Okay, so it helps sometimes to get an idea of what you're doing before you just start jumping in. So if I add 8 to both sides, I get 96. Notice I cannot undo this power until I get rid of the coefficient, which is pretty common theme between every problem that we're doing. If we divide both sides by 6, we get x to the 2/3 power equals 16. Okay, you are doing this without a calculator, so if you didn't know that, you could guess and check. So you could say, well, I think it's 16. 16 times 6 is 36. 6 times 1 plus 3 is 9. Okay. In order to undo raising something to the 2/3, goes back to math 2, we raise it to the reciprocal power. So raise it to the 3/2. Okay, the reason is, if you look at this, it's 2/3 then times 3/2, since it's a power raised to a power, which gives us 6/6, which is 1. So then this would become x to the first, which is what we want. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. So this becomes x equals plus or minus, because this right here, go ahead and write this down, it's called an index. And the index is what tells us whether something is plus or minus or not. Okay, index if it's even, 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay. If this is saying 16 to the 3/2, this number is what's important for figuring out how many times I'm multiplying something to get 16. So what number multiplied by itself twice is 16? So that would be 4 times 4. But the numerator or the index is, the numerator is telling us how many times or how many 4s we want. So the 3 is saying that we want 3 of them. Well, we only have 2 of them, so then we need to add 1 more. So 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. Okay, and then because the index was even, it's plus or minus 64. Okay, if you're wondering, if you need a little bit further explanation on this 2/3, so this is, think about if you rewrote it, you would say 6 times the cube root of x squared. So notice that right there, that x squared is what matters, because positive 64 squared and negative 64 squared are the exact same number. Okay, so which is why it's plus or minus. Okay, alright, so two different ways you can start this problem. I would start it by looking at the fact that this is a negative, and I would say, you know what, I don't like negative exponents, so I'm going to flip it and put it in the right place. The 5 stays where it's at, because it's 5 to the first power. X to the negative third goes in the denominator, so flip it and forget the negative. And then that equals negative 1 over 25. And then if you notice, we have a fraction set equal to a fraction, so we can cross multiply. Okay. So if we cross multiply, 5 times 25 is 125, which equals x to the third times negative 1 is negative x to the third. Okay, so if I want to solve for x, I need to divide both sides by negative. So I get negative 125 equals x to the third. If I want to undo raising to the third power, I cube root. So cube root means what times itself 3 times is negative 125, and that would be negative 5. Since negative 5 times negative 5 is 25, times another negative 5 gives you a negative. Okay, notice that there is no plus or minus because we raised to an odd power. So x equals negative 5 is my only answer. Okay, let's talk about some summary. So a plus or minus, so go ahead and write this down. A plus or minus is required when the index, is an even number. Okay, like a 2, 4, 6, 8. Let me give you some examples. So if you had something like x to the 2/5 power, the index is 2, so there'd be a plus or minus as an answer. If you had something like x equals 8/15, that would give you plus or minus because that right there is an even number. If you have something like, you got to be careful. If you have something like, let's say 10 to the fourths, even though the 10 is even, you have to think if you were to simplify that, that would be x to the 5 halves, and this is not an even number, so that means this is not going to give me that plus or minus as an answer. Okay. What if I had something like x to the 4th? It's really weird, big 4. If we had something like x to the 4th, well then think about it as a fraction. If I raise it to the 4th, then that's 4 over 1, which means then my 4 is my index and it's even, so yes, plus or minus. Okay. Something that wouldn't be is like if I had x to the 3/4 power. Since my index is 3, then this is not plus or minus. Okay, so then that concludes your notes. So then your job is to show this to the sub to show that you are done taking notes. Okay, you need to put everything away, take the quiz, turn it in, and then when you are done with that, the sub will give you the homework, and then you have the rest of the period to work on the homework. Okay, make sure that there are no phones or Chromebooks out while people are taking the quiz. It's going to be pretty much a silent period for the most part. All right, good luck. I will be back tomorrow. If you have any questions, come see me in the morning. Good luck. Thank you.